We've all seen it. We've watched parents juggle multiple responsibilities for generations. My mom did it, your mom did it, and her mom before that. It's just something we've always done without much discussion. But isn't that part of the problem? How is juggling parenting, paid work, running a household, and so much more not a bigger deal? It's like having 3 jobs rolled into one with a never ending stream of decisions to make every single day. Especially now, in this age of high expectations and information overload, where everything is just a click away. This work is so often unsupported, underappreciated, and completely unrecognized. We take it for granted both within ourselves and among us. This year, I'm juggling a fair bit myself. I'm pregnant with my second child, trying my best to be present for my sweet toddler, managing our household, working full-time, and producing season 2 of my podcast, Bump In. I started Bump In mostly for myself. In season 1, I've had the chance to speak with some incredible parents about their early parenting journeys and have learned so much. I hope you have too. This season, I'm celebrating all things juggling, the many aspects of being an adult and parenting shared straight from parents. We'll also dive into the support systems, or a lack of them, that shape our experiences and explore ways to better support ourselves, our families, communities, and workplaces. Join me for some fascinating conversations available on Spotify and YouTube in season 2 of Bump In with me, your host, Shruti Bharat. Hi, Payoshni. Good morning. And thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, Bump In. I know you and I have been in touch over the last couple of years on, a variety of different conversations, but I'm thrilled to actually have you here and talk about something that's close to both of us. So just a quick intro into what we're trying to do here on Bump In. I started off with this platform called Beyond the Bump. It was an attempt actually really just to help myself, just transition into this interesting job called motherhood. And while I've loved many, many aspects of it, I also feel like there was a lot of rebuilding, rejigging, finding a new identity. So we spent a lot of the first season talking to parents about relatable stories on their initial phase of the journey, so 0 to 24 months. I now have a 3-year-old and I've got another baby on the way. I'm 32 weeks pregnant as we record this. And I think another interesting point touched my heart in this entire journey, which was really around the support systems that exist for parents, particularly moms. And of course, I have a very sort of urban approach to my overall conversation, but I still think it's worth talking about. And we'll discuss more about the what and the why as we get into it. I typically start most episodes with a little bit about who we're talking to. And Payoshni, I'm super interested in not just your personal story, but also the wonderful work you're doing through your startup, Sama. So I'd love to hear about you, where you are, sort of what your journey has been so far, and maybe even a little bit about your startup. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Shruti, for having me. And I remember when you were going to start Beyond the Bump is when we first connected, actually. Somebody had tagged us on each other's LinkedIn post. And so glad to see that you are doing the second season. Just shows like how much consistent effort you have put. So kudos for that. I know how hard it is to do anything on the side consistently with like children and a full-time job. So massive respect for that. And thank you so much for having me. My name is Payoshni. I'm based in Bangalore. And I run a startup called Sama. And at home, I'm, of course, a spouse and a mother to a human 6-year-old girl. And I have 4 dogs. So there is a lot of like caretaking that needs to be done around the house. But it's an interesting, chaotic house. I started my career about 18 years ago. In fact, actually, if I have to like go really back, I grew up in this a place called Kanpur, which is a tier 3 city, maybe in in the like the different tiers of cities that we have. And my dad was a defense scientist. He's retired now. So we grew up in the city, which was inherently unsafe for women. I remember not being allowed outside the house like after 6:30, because just that's the kind of city it was. Small city, very less opportunities. You do academics, you go to tuition, you come back, you play a little, that sort of an upbringing. But I think what I missed outside in terms of like external exposure, and I didn't realize it then, but I was getting a lot of schooling in on what equity and partnership at home looked like in my house. So both my parents were working. And of course, my mother, given that time, had to curtail her career. She was a professor at a university when she married my dad, but she had to like move to UP with him. And, she took up like a job as a teacher, etc. But my parents, my mother kept up her work as long and as much as she could. So that is just like one thing I've always grown up seeing my mother, my masis, everybody in the family working, right? And same with my sister. My sister is an eye surgeon, and throughout her career, including like having twin boys, etc., I've always seen her working. So there is a lot of like good example there. But what I was talking about the equitable partnership was the fact that, because my mom and dad both work, both of them got up really early. And I saw the kind of role men and women play in an equal partnership at home where, my dad would chop the vegetables, my mother would cook. They'll get up early so that they can finish all these chores before we woke up and, get it ready. But I've always seen that sort of like responsibility distribution at home, which I think shaped my worldview about what really equity should look like, right? At the most basic level. Anyway, so after finishing my schooling in Kanpur, I moved to Pune, studied there, found my first job in retail there. And this is all, I'm dating myself, but this is all about 18, 19 years ago. And after being in Pune for a while, I moved to Bombay. I used to work with this, I'm not naming any names, but I used to work with this really big retail company. And I think I had reached a point in my career after about 8.5 years of saying, how many more buy one, get one deals can I sell in Diwali, right? Retail is an exciting sector. I love it, right? But after a point, you're like, I'm just doing the same repetitive work. While this was happening, I came across an ad for Teach for India. I was very intrigued by the model. I thought I really wanted to, dedicate the next few years of my life to doing something in the development sector. So I applied for the fellowship, got through, and moved to Pune, did the fellowship. And I think after the fellowship, because it's such a transformational experience, I'm sure, Shruti, I know you have worked with a bunch of like TFI folks as well. So you might find this repetitive, but a lot, like it's such a powerful transformational experience that I did not want to go back to the corporate life, continue to work in the development sector. Till I think in early 22, was I entered the startup world by working at a startup myself. But I also came across a lot of literature that was coming out of India in early 22, which spoke about the disappearing women from the Indian workforce. And a little bit of it was like after effect of COVID and just the way like Indian workforce, Indian economy was shaping up. But at one point, and this is a data reported by CMIE, which is a leading data collection agency, that only 9% of urban Indian women were gainfully employed. Now, this really shook me because you feel like you and your friends are the majority, but you really are a minority. And then I was like, okay, so where are the other women? And that kind of like really got me interested in reading more on this topic, listening to all the podcasts that were available, etc. And the more I read, the more I realized how our workplaces are sometimes built to exclude women. And because of the kind of like equitable partnerships I have seen growing up, I would also, believe that my partner is a very equal partner at home currently as well. I just found that off, right? I feel like men and women contribute equally to the running of this world. And this disbalance of the workforce really concerned me. And while I was going through this journey, I met my co-founder, Mritika, who's based in Bombay. And she was going through this journey somehow serendipitously on her own. And then both of us, joined hands together to set up Sama. And we set up Sama first with a very clear vision to say, how do we ensure that these 9% women that currently at the workforce, that they don't drop off. So our focus was very much on how do we service women who are already in the workforce, and then also work on building a pipeline and, increasing the representation. So the North Star is how do we overall increase representation of women? But the way we chose to do it was really to say, how do we ensure that people who are already in the workforce are not dropping out? So how do we focus on retention of women in the workplace? This is how we started in 22. We have expanded the scope of our work a little bit, but at the heart of it, we hold a very, very strong gender lens to the work we do. And we really do believe that, of course, at an organization level, there could be cultural problems, structural problems, but there are also gender-specific problems that organizations need to address.
What a fantastic intro. Thank you so much. I think I can see the influences that you've had in your personal life that have set, examples for you and asked you, driven you to this question, right? You and your co-founder. And I've also interacted with Vika before. So it's really lovely to see what you are doing. I've been following your work over the last 2 years, so I have some idea of what's been happening. And in fact, I've even recommended your platform to a few folks in HR who are grappling with this question. So, Payoshni, there's a lot to unpack because I think that the question on my mind really, and knowing your journey and knowing what you're trying to solve for is, I think, just a little bit talking about from your experience, personally and professionally. You asked yourself the question, where is the rest? I think protecting the 9% is absolutely important, and we should definitely talk more about that. But something that's striking me more and more is how much we're juggling so much as urban women who are, taking care of dependents, whether that be children, pets, elderly parents. We're also juggling full-time work that has a very specific paradigm in terms of what success looks like. So I'm curious to understand from your perspective. I know even on your website, you listed there are 3 major junctures in a woman's life: motherhood, marriage, not necessarily in that order, and migration, which tend to generally lead to a lot of attrition from the workforce. So I would love to hear from you, drawing from both personal and professional. Where is the leakage happening? What do you think is some of the core reasons you're seeing for a lot of women dropping out and making this kind of a decision?
Thanks for the question, Shruti. And I think this is the question that we really need to dwell the most upon, right? Because if you look at the statistics, the early level statistics are very encouraging. So about 50% of currently India's graduates are women. And we know that a lot of our graduates are, of course, STEM graduates. About 32% enter the workforce at an entry level, which not 50%, but still a encouraging figure, right? We see only 12% reaching the middle manager positions. And if you see, those are the years when women tend to get married, probably have their first child. But the biggest drop is from the middle management. Like one is, of course, 32 to 12% means you have lost 20%. But from senior manager to reach CXO level position, we have only 1% women. So that drop is huge as well. And I think very clearly, like if you plot it out, it definitely feels like that marriage is one place where the drop-off is happening. And the second is, definitely motherhood. I see 2 facets to this problem, right? Like one is more society, more personal, right? We still are I remember there is a study that Professor Ashwini Deshpande from Ashoka University had shared on Twitter, which spoke about how as Indians become, as a middle group, the middle income group of India starts amassing more wealth, the women participation drops. It's actually a U-shaped curve where the minute we start earning more money or the household income increases, the first is ki, ab kaam chhod do. Like women don't need to work. So that's that's the societal part of it, right? A lot of our girls and you and I both know such people who are really bright women in the college, stopped working after marriage because in-laws didn't want it or spouse didn't want it. So a lot of it is like just social conditioning, the way our society is, right? This problem is very, very long term. I don't know if I'll see this change in my lifetime, though one would argue that in urban pockets a little bit you are seeing this change. So one part is the societal problem. The second part, of course, is the kind of support or the lack of support that women are getting at workplaces. One thing that I heard at a DEI conference, which really stayed with me, was to say that when women require support for motherhood, right? When you're having your first child, and Shruti, when you have it the second time, I'm sure you'll find it a little bit easier, right? Like you've done the first. But when we have our first child, it's just so confusing and chaotic and you're going through so much. But remember that all of these pauses or all of these milestones are only temporary. I think a big mistake that workplaces tend to make is that when women get married or, when they are having their first child, or even let's say when they're doing elderly caregiving, all of these are temporary phases, and they need support only for a X amount of time. Whether, it's flexibility or it's commute to work or whatever, that looks like for the women. And I see more and more organizations understanding this now. But a huge problem that I see on the other side is workplaces not understanding that this is a temporary arrangement, and hence the flexibility that needs to be given could also be temporary. Just because a woman has got a child, she's not, worthless in the workforce. So I think that's a little bit of change that needs to happen. And in all the organizations that you see who have a good gender ratio and are very supportive to women, they have understood it and they are providing it accordingly. So as I said, two facets to the problem: the societal social conditioning that's going to be long term. But I sincerely hope that workplaces, with the kind of resources that they have, with the kind of, wherewithal they have, they would be able to solve for the second one, which is providing more support to women at the workplace. And that's the space Sama operates in as well.
Very, very interesting. And I think I agree with both your points, both from a lived experience as well as from, observation. I want to dig into some of this a little bit. I know, Payoshni, the aspect of the society is hard to unravel, right? Because it's very deeply entrenched. The way family units function and the narratives that are within each of the households are very, very hard to undo. Of course, with more women moving out of their sort of joint family setup, living separately in different cities, I think one, of course, they're distancing themselves from any form of support system, which is its own hardship. But they're also becoming a little more independent and far more empowered to kind of make these choices more consciously. But whatever said, I think women still have the same 24 hours in the day as anyone else, and you're still trying to execute what feels like 2 to 3 jobs, while juggling so much. So my question is actually more at the level of the individual or the woman herself, right? And this is something I myself have struggled with, which is, I think, the biggest difficulty I faced while getting back into work. And I think I can safely say I've experienced this through other women as well, which is a complete shift in confidence. You feel like there is almost, you're operating with a handicap, which isn't really the case, right? When you actually really take a step back and observe yourself as a mother, you've actually gained a lot more in terms of leadership and the ability to cope with a multi-dimensional, complex problem, right? Let's call it a problem for a second. And it's not just about the child, it's the logistics of managing a child and all of the people surrounding it. This is great work experience and ideally should lend itself very well. And in fact, many studies and research shows that a good balance of men and women at the workplace actually does enhance the overall productivity of the organization, as well as these organizations go on to do financially very well. So I think, coming to my question, what has been your observation at the level of the woman herself, right? In terms of what are her barriers, both internal to her and just immediately external to her, that you'd want to in a millionaire scenario kind of address. But what have you observed?
Yeah, you're right, Shruti. I think a lot of our barriers are also internal, right? And I hear you. I took just like a 5 months break, I remember, between the two jobs. But even when I was getting into the second job, I was a little skeptical, saying, oh, can I do it? Forgetting that I've done it for 18 years, right? So there is definitely a dip in confidence a little bit that happens during that period. Your question was about how women are handling these barriers, or like how workplaces should?
I think both, in terms of what are women experiencing from your perspective, and how are workplaces responding to this?
Right, right. I can say from personal experience and, the few women that we've spoken to. So before starting Sama, we did like a study with about 250 to 300 women. And study was really to just understand on what are their barriers or what are the barriers they face at the workplace. And I think two things stand out. One definitely is that the modern Indian woman wants to work. And it's not about the money. It's about, being able to go out of the house, having an agency, having the same family matters also, right? Like when you're bringing in the dough is when you can have an opinion. I mean, very, very frankly, that's the truth for most Indian households, right? So modern Indian women definitely want to work. The second one, which I've observed in myself and my friends, and which also came out, is that we, despite our ambition, we operate from this very interesting place of guilt. where we feel almost guilty to be ambitious, saying, I really want this job, but it's in Kormangla and I live in Hebbal, or, like, how do I balance it sort of a thing. This will mean like less time with my child and all of that. So I think this unique balance of feeling guilty about having an ambition is very, very urban India. And of course, apart from that, mother's guilt is true. I was reading a study that day which said that mother's guilt is actually a phenomena. Like it's a medical phenomena where you feel guilty about not doing enough or not being enough for your child. So that's definitely happening. And I see that a lot in urban women, especially where there seems to be a constant need for ambition. And I think a little bit social media amplifies it, right? Like you see your friends taking international trips, having great jobs, speaking at events. So you also want to do more, but you also want to be like fair to your family. So that's the space that you're operating with a little bit. I think I go back to the point of just, and this is like one advice I have started giving, if anybody is asking me, to both women and organizations, that this is temporary. Your child really, really needs you maybe for the first 6 to 7 months. After that, all of this can be outsourced. And whether that outsourcing is to like your in-laws, if you are supporting, parents, in-laws, then that's great. But if you have to also put your child into a daycare or hire a nanny, that's absolutely okay. Like you decide, and this is something that I say personally about me when I'm asked this question, is that I truly believe like this is the one life I have got, right? And in this life, whether I decide to do like a Teacher India fellowship or become an entrepreneur at age 40, these are my chances that I'm going to take because this is the only life God has handed me, right? And I definitely very strongly advise women to be a little bit more selfish and start thinking like this, saying that this is also only your life, right? You're not going to have another life after your child goes to college or whatever. So definitely, I think from the organization's perspective, definitely the fact that it's a temporary pause. The other thing that we have seen work in some of the good organizations is this buddy system or keeping in touch with the woman through the pregnancy in some way, whatever is acceptable. So typically what happens is that when you're on your maternity leave, you have had like a 6 months total gap from the organization. You're not hearing about what are the changes happening, what's happening in your team, maybe the product you were leading, what happened to that, nothing. So one of the things that really helps is for you to keep up your confidence and also stay in the thick of thin is to either be in informal touch with a friend at work or have like a more formal buddy system. So that's one. If you have taken a complete break and you're going back and looking for a new job, one thing that we have seen and which women have said works for them is keeping yourself upskilled in some way. Do that, course available on Upgrad. Do what interests you. Try out different things. So you also feel like that your, wheels are turning continuously and you've also gained some additional skills. I hear when you say, Shruti, that, during maternity, all of us learn a lot of these different skills. But I would be a little wary of, using that in an interview. I know there is a famous, either a Tanishq ad or something where the woman says, I learned this and this. I found it a little cliche. I feel like if you want to compete in a world that's equal, we also need to like come with more hard skills that we are able to sell. I'm not saying at all that soft skills are not important, but I definitely feel that if in your break, you are able to upskill yourself in some way, stay in touch with the news, you should know like which startup has become unicorn, if startup world is your thing or whatever, right? In your field, what's happening, if you keep yourself abreast, the going back is easier and like just in terms of your confidence.
I think that's very, very useful advice, Payoshni. And I wanted to actually ask you two questions related to what you shared. So there's also, as we're seeing, and this is actually the flip side, as we're seeing more and more people struggle with confidence and maybe drop out of the work, we're also seeing among the empowered and among folks who are able to it's interesting that you pointed out that as the household income improves, actually there are more women who can consciously choose to drop out and rejoin or do their own thing, and there's also a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of some of that. I'm just curious to also understand your take on the other side, which is even the notion of succeeding at work, even the idea that success looks like this, that there is a finite performance, there's a finite participation, you have to be available for this much time. It's quite male centric and favorable to, with all due respect, to people who don't necessarily have that breadth of responsibilities. And what we're essentially, in some sense, also asking women to do is stay relevant in that game, right? Now, my question to you is, do we need to change the rules of the game, or do we need to play the game, right?
This is such a $1 million question. I mean, I definitely feel we need to change the rule of the game, very honestly, because I believe workplaces have an inherent responsibility of creating an inclusive atmosphere. And it's not just for like a mother, right? It could also be about somebody who has physical disabilities, who cannot go out for a smoke break every 2 hours, for example, right? So I feel this is inherently, without a doubt, the responsibility of a workplace to create an inclusive and supportive work environment where even if I pack my bags and leave at 6:30, it's not counted as, oh, she's cutting down on work sort of a thing. Which is why, like the organizations that Sama also interacts with, our pitch is never to say that, our pitch is definitely to say that we have to build more inclusive and supportive work environments for all genders. Who says that men who are fathers don't have to leave on time? Like, obviously, they also want to go back to their family. They want to spend time with their child. They want to relieve their mother, vibes of day long responsibility, etc. So I feel like that if we change the rules of the game, it will not only benefit the women, it will benefit everyone in the system, whether you are somebody with any kind of disability, or you are socially awkward, or you're a man who has responsibilities, or you're just somebody who likes to have a work-life balance. You want to go to the gym after work. So we need to definitely change the rule of the game. I feel like that following the game, and also due respect to women who do follow the and play the game. One way to deal with it, especially if you're taking on like motherhood responsibilities, is to maybe pause the game for a little bit. And I think it's easier said than done, but there is a lot of like awareness and acknowledgement that needs to happen, saying that I have decided to be a mother, so I am going to cut down on some bit of it. And Shruti, you will relate. Like when we become mothers, one of the first things that go off our radar is meeting up with friends, right? Because there is just no time. So unless your friend is coming to your house, you just don't have time. And that's a call we take, right? We tell our friends, okay, this is temporary. Let my child be a little independent, or our friends understand, whatever. So in the same way, I think we just need to acknowledge that when you become a mother, there is going to be a little bit of pause, slow down at the workplace level. Is it unfair? Sure. But is it what it is? And is it going to bring you the peace and joy that you want both at home and allow you to continue to work? Then I think that acknowledgement becomes equally important as well.
So, full disclosure, Payoshni, thanks for sharing that. I'm very much at that juncture today, right? I have a 3-year-old and I'm 32 weeks pregnant. I'm about to go on a break. The last time around, I didn't know what I was signing up for, right? I came back to work 6 months later, and it's been an interesting journey after that. I think it's been much more about me learning what type of a professional I am and where I want to be. This time around, my eyes are wide open, right? I know what I'm signing up for on both sides of the table. One kid is one kid, 2 kids feels like a lot more, and I'm about to learn that in the best way possible, right? Through reality. And I understand also that work, I'm fortunate to work in a very flexible, very inclusive workplace, but there's a lot of self-advocacy, right? It's about setting boundaries. I am also at that juncture in my career right now where I am in a fairly leadership responsibility. The buck does stop with me. I do have to consider. And I think there's also been important considerations about the year that I just went through in terms of, hey, I'm not really going to get really rewarded for this, crazy amount of hard work I've pulled off. And there's a lot of recognition of that. So I'm at an interesting crossroads, I'd say, whereas there's been a lot of self-talk and coaching to really say, hey, this is okay. In a long-term career, a year is not as a drop in the bucket, right? It's not going to make any difference. But I think that's also because I've been able to create some degree of, support and understanding around me. I don't think that can be extended just to anyone. Now, an important thought that has occurred to me in this journey is I fully agree with you that we need to keep working at the rules of the game. This can apply to anyone, not just mothers. It can apply to any parent, anyone in a circumstance where they want to do something besides work. But it's interesting that the game and the rules are often set by people who aren't necessarily as sensitized to what needs to happen. And that's been my mostly, I think it with the best of intentions as well. There's an overemphasis on logistics. that, okay, if the individual is able to create a support system of, installing a nanny or a daycare or get their parents to help, etc., etc., life is sorted. But if children were brought up only through that mechanism, we wouldn't have half the mental health challenges we do in the world today, right? There is clearly emotional instability because a lot of people were inaccessible and made choices that maybe erred on the side of economics and finance. And again, that makes the world go round, right? So my question is that it is logistics the answer, and should all, say, heads of HR or heads of whoever's making decisions like this in organizations be further sensitized, to what is really inclusivity, particularly in this very temporary phase, as you've rightly put it. It's not forever, it's a few years, of a woman's life. What's your comment there? What can leaders in that space do more of?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question, Shruti. And you're right. Like, I'm also, like, as you phrased it, I was thinking how easily we advise people on the logistics part, completely discounting the amount of emotional and social labor mothers do, right? Like, my child's entire social calendar, my daughter is 6 now, and she goes to at least, like, I would say 18 birthday parties in a year. And right from, and nobody talks about it. People think it's funny, but it's not. I need to know each child, what they like, their birthday, what is she going to wear. So this entire social life that nobody else takes responsibility for, but the mother. So I hear you. That, and these are things that cannot be outsourced till, I don't know, all of us get a personal genie or something. So I hear you. I feel like at the organization level, which is why I said that the responsibility of creating an inclusive and supportive work environment has to be with the leaders of the organization and the organization. Is logistics the answer? No. Is logistics a answer? For sure. In all of these like large tech companies where they have a daycare inbuilt, we have seen that parents find it so much more easier that it's the same workplace. You drop the child off, you finish your work, you pick the child off. It's so much more easier than going to 4 different places. So definitely logistics is part of the answer. But overall, ultimately, what's going to solve, especially for the mental health crisis that you're talking about, and we're seeing this more and more, it's because parents, and I'm guilty of this myself, right? Like after I finish my work, I sometimes don't want to engage with my daughter. I just want to be quiet. I want to scroll on my phone. I want to drink a cup of tea. And all of us are guilty of this, right? So one, we are, of course, spending time at work. And then the time that's off work feels like that I need to grab some time for myself as well. So the key is ultimately just going to have a little bit more hours put into the hands of the parents. And that can be only done if the workplaces starts valuing the effort versus the time. So not the fact that you're clocking in 8 hours, but that you're able to do all the tasks that are assigned to you or all the tasks that you are able to take up. So the balance is somewhere here. And I like one of the programs that Sama offers, and it's one of our most popular, is the workplace sensitization program. And this happens where we, typically speak to the workforce or a subset of the workforce about two main things. One, gender sensitization for both the genders to acknowledge the struggles that each one of them have. And second is unconscious bias, because a lot of unconscious bias seeps into everything that we do. And this is on a personal level as well, right? But also an office level, on the colleague that I have lunch with is from my area, or this person I like in accounts because she or he speaks my language. Like all of these biases affect our daily work life. So two programs that we offer and are very popular are this sensitization and unconscious bias. And which is why I say there is so much that needs to be done for organizations. And we need to go beyond, just the Googles and the Accentures to ensure that all workplaces are able to provide that sort of sensitive, supportive, inclusive workplace. I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I cannot say this enough on how important it is, not just for mothers, but every single parent out there, or basically every single individual out there.
No, I fully agree. I think there is a lot of personal bias operating because, as you said, we're all inspired by what's happened to us at home, right? Which is ironic because when we can't seem to relate that, hey, that's also somebody else's reality, right? Today's children's homes are being created by the same workforce that's at work, right? So it's kind of in a way ironic. Payoshni, this has been so illuminating in terms of the overall discussion, and I can see how much you and your startup are working towards really creating a strong data-driven narrative around this. So I'm just so excited about the work that you're doing. If there was, and I know you've already shared plenty of tips and tricks, both at the individual and the organizational level, if there was anything else that came to mind in terms of, say, there's a woman today who's embarking on having her first child, she's about to take a break from work, very much toggling with the idea that she may not return. What would you say to her, right now to say, hey, maybe there are other options? Are there things that you would, and I think the pieces that you spoke about in terms of being relevant, staying up to date, maybe having a buddy, looking at some upskilling in the gaps that you do end up getting through the day, once your schedule kind of settles down after a few months. Any thoughts around that for women to get, something going in terms of a confidence getting into this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing that a woman who's going on a maternity leave is to just have a very frank discussion with their manager, and letting them know about your true intentions of coming back or not coming back. I feel like that this is such a big missing piece where we hesitate to speak to our managers, and maybe the manager looks at us as very valuable resources, is ready to give us more work. I remember we interviewed this person who was working at Google, and she actually got promoted during her maternity leave because the manager had such immense confidence, and because she had also had a very frank discussion telling the manager that I'm going for 6 months. After I come back, I'm looking at, taking more responsibility, etc., etc. So I feel like the first thing that we need to get right is to not hesitate and feel like maternity is like a personal topic and why should I tell my manager about it? But one, inform them in advance if you're going on a leave. Second, have a frank conversation. Tell them that you're planning to come back, not come back. When you come back, do you want to take it easy? And I know some of these things you can't predict, but some of, like, whatever is your true intention, like, I definitely want to come back and work for some more time. So that's one that people who are already in the workforce must absolutely do. And in terms of, as I said, that if you're decided to quit, number one, just enjoy the break. Spend time with your child. That time is not going to come back. Every time I look at my 6-year-old, I feel like, oh, he was so much cuter when he was smaller. So that time is definitely never coming back. Right? They're never going to be this cute again. So definitely enjoy that time. And as I said, that once you have, bonded with your child, let your body heal, let your heart heal in whichever way it needs to be. And then you start thinking about what is it that you want to do. One thing that really helped me when I was thinking of returning is speaking to a friend of mine who's a life coach. She's a leadership coach. So and she helped me like draw these Venn diagrams of things that I like to do, what intersects, what are some of the things I did not enjoy, etc. So doing some of those exercises, there are so many resources available for free on the internet, or you can find a friend who's a coach, or actually pay like a leadership coach to do it for yourself. But invest in that, because that's an investment for life. Help you figure out what do you want to see. Maybe you said that after having a kid, you say that, okay, for 1 year, I'm not going to work. After 1 year, I want to set up, I don't know, a candle making business, for example. So you invest those 6 months learning more about it. I'm just saying that we need to be as planned about our careers, as meticulous about what we want to do as we are about our children. And rightly as they deserve it, I think your career does too. So I would say invest in yourself, whether it's in the form of a coach or having, upskilling through paid courses, whether it's through traveling. A lot of people I know find so much more when they just go for a retreat for, let's say, I remember Mridvika had a lot of great enlightenment when she went on a retreat before, saying, I want to do something of my own. So sometimes, these things happen for folks as well. So do whatever it is, but invest in yourself. And at the cost of repeating myself, be selfish. It's important for women to be selfish. It's important for you to remember that you also have just this one life. And I love the millennial YOLO principle for this, because you really do. And all the risks that you need to take in terms of your career, this is it.
So well put. Thank you for that. I think I have one last question for you, Payoshni, is as an entrepreneur, right? Often I see this choice being made, and I've seen a lot of women who have just had a child or two children becoming founders or becoming entrepreneurs. I'm extremely drawn to this idea. For me, I'm already wading in it a little bit by doing beyond the bump in some sense as a side hustle. So it's not remunerative in any way. But I'm just curious to understand. I don't think the grass is greener. I don't think running your own company is easier by any stretch of the imagination. So what is your take on this in terms of juggling being an entrepreneur and a mother?
Yeah. I mean, entrepreneurship is very, very, very hard. And I'm an eternal optimist, like to the point that I'm sometimes toxically optimist. But even my optimism is fading over the time because I know how hard it is, right? Like the constantly getting rejected, hearing no's. It's very hard. And at the work, you can just, wrap up 24 December done. Now I'm on a year-end break. You can't do that as an entrepreneur at all. Having said that, I think the one thing that entrepreneurship does give is a little bit you can be a master of your time. A little bit, I say, because ultimately, if there is a client call, there is a client call, right? You can't do anything about it. But you're right, Shruti, I am seeing a trend as well of a lot more women embracing entrepreneurship after a certain, life age. My only thing is, and I'll quote a football coach, Philip, that I see every day. There is a football field right across my house. And he was telling a child the other day, and I overheard and I found it so, really enlightening. He told a child saying, Suresh, pick up the ball, not because you're excited. Pick up the ball because you're prepared. And I was thinking about it and relating it so much to, entrepreneurship journey. Don't do it because you feel like, ki abhi to flexibility hoga, maja hi maja, I'm my own boss. That is not it. Like that's probably one of the only advantages I would say. There are so many other like cons to the other side. So do it if you're prepared. Don't do it just because you're excited by the idea of entrepreneurship. There is so much that you need to think about, like in terms of your financial runway, what happens if you have like a client meeting in Bombay and you're based in Bangalore and there is nobody to look after the child? Has happened with me. I had to ultimately, ask one of my mom friends to pick her up. So these things will happen. These things will make you feel even more, I guess, guilty. Like I literally felt ashamed that both me and my husband couldn't be there for my child and we had to ask someone. And then I had to counsel myself saying, see, it takes a village. Our parents had more support systems. We don't know. Our mom friends are going to be our support system. So, sorry, but like coming back to this is just to again to say that entrepreneurship is very interesting. I wouldn't trade these 2 years with anything ever. I feel like what I learned in 18 years of my career before, I've learned so much more in the last 2 years. But it's extremely hard on you financially, on you overall, like just like developing a really thick skin because you're constantly hearing rejections. There are so few yeses in a sea of no's. So again, do it if you're prepared. Don't do it if you're excited.
Beautiful last words on the podcast. Payoshni, thank you so much for your time. I understand it's a Monday morning. I know I have some time off and you certainly don't. I'm so thankful for the work you are doing through Summer Lives and also through all of the stuff that you've shared with us today. I'm certain we're going to have many more conversations, but thank you so much for doing this. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I was thinking that I'm not prepared for this conversation, but as you said, Shruti, just so naturally flowed. So thank you for asking, such interesting questions and allowing me to share.